What's up, ZBrush friends? Hey guys, give me a shout as you're jumping in here. Let me know if you can hear me before I get started. Oh man, I got all this extra chat from Paul's stream. Looks like Paul was getting wild in his stream as per usual. Nice. Astaroth, what's going on? Thanks for letting me know. Is it Rui? Rui? I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's still too loud. You're freaking me out, you know? That was tough. I'm glad that you're kidding and it's not destroying your guys' ears. That was brutal. I felt so bad. There was I guess on that topic, before I get started with my stream, we had a ZBrush Live, ZBrush Masters series. If any of you guys that are just jumping in here didn't check these out, we're still going through these. I'm doing another one with Vichar Bien, which is coming up soon. We'll definitely have the audio situation figured out for that one. But every time I spoke, I was just like, you guys should have seen it. I was about, I don't know, like 6 feet away from the microphone asking questions and trying to field and help host this guy. It was so brutal. Hopefully it was still some good information though. But I'm going to post this in the chat to you guys that are just jumping in. We got a thing on ZBrush Master or ZBrush Central called ZBrush Masters. These are streams that are happening throughout April and May as of now with some top tier pros in ZBrush. So these are really special streams. Make sure to check those out. All you guys who are just jumping in here, just so you know, this is, if anyone's a normal stream watcher of mine, I usually spend my time in ZBrush. I'm working on another project. This is a ZBrushCore stream, so I'm going through and designing. Let's see, I'll show you this. So this is the character that we're working on. I'm just going through some basic techniques that I want to share on going about getting a character done. Trying to make use of symmetry and then also getting to pose. This is kind of my underlying goal. Brian, yeah, that's actually a good question. I'm not responsible for the ZBrush Live schedule page, but I actually had the same question myself. I'm going to find out, because there's no, if you go to the Pixologic ZBrush Live page, whoops, let's go back to just ZBrushLive.com. You should normally, there's a schedule. We'll have to figure out what's going on with that. They might be making changes to it. I assume that's probably the case. For this stream, if you guys want to check out this one, any of my other ones, I'm going to paste also my presenters page, which has got the first stream in here, which is really just going through. And I wasn't too happy, honestly, with, I was trying to show off some good, some techniques to do just like stylized kind of planar sculpting. And the head that I came out with last time I didn't love. Basically, though, the techniques were kind of just going and trying to like flesh out the face and get the head completed while also playing around with this Dynamesh polish technique, which is basically just turning polish on and really just going in with like, you get like an age polish brush or something that will allow you to crease edges, right? You start to get like nice hard edges that'll happen, say maybe at the lips. Oh, looks like I just Dynamesh the lips here. But if I run this Dynamesh with polish on, I could start to like sharpen up edges, things like that. We're going to come back. We're going to be using this a lot for some of these other elements throughout the series. But essentially, my first stream was that. Sean Lake, you're saying you don't play it, but it pays your salary. Nice. So I assume, well, I guess the question would be is, if you don't play it, then you definitely work on the game. What'd you work on? I'd love to know. I played it quite a bit actually when it came out. I've been playing actually. I in my free time when I get some breaks here at Pixologic, I just need to kind of decompress from hammering the keyboard and the Wacom pen. I'll jump into Call of Duty Warzone lately, but Fortnite was fun. Yeah, it could make toys too. That's a good point. There's some, I mean, if you worked in the character design department, we know a lot of people that are over there working in that studio and have been designing characters for the game. I don't know if it's still going as heavy as it was in the last like 8 months. Your contractor for the LA office. That's fantastic, man. Well, congratulations. I mean, that's a heck of a set of responsibilities you have there. Educational coordinator, authorized instructor. Those are great titles. I've been in I'm part of the development team at Pixologic for quite a while. I've been with Pixologic for 10 years, but I'm also a part-time instructor at the college level, teaching this kind of stuff, and mostly product design is what I like to focus on. Designing clothing, footwear, that kind of stuff. So this project here, so I can get started, I left off with the head. And what I want to get through today is starting to get to some of these accessories. So I'm going to go kill this image, and we'll just leave this one on. And just if you guys are interested and want to connect, you can follow me on Instagram. Those are my accounts, personal and art. And also, since I'm spending a lot of time on ZBrush Live these days, or I'm sorry, on ZBrush Central. Let me just go to my ZBC page. I've been trying to catalog every project that I'm doing most recently. So let's get out of this. And I want to go into this gallery. And I'm going to copy this. And I'll paste this to you guys in the chat. Rui, I'm what you would probably call a creative developer. I work mostly with all of our coders and our programmers to help facilitate and sort of coordinate the features themselves. So the on the creative side, I am sort of like you would call a power user. So we kind of, myself and a few others, we all kind of collaborate together to help come up with ideas, figure out how things should function, those sort of things. So not programming these days, not doing any code. And Ava, you're saying, thanks for about polished diamond, saying it looks so good. Oh yeah, for sure. I'm glad that I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Let me just I did not mean to click cancel or click close. I'm going to be using this a lot through this process, so you can hopefully see it more in action. Let's get rid of this. Yeah, so I spend a lot of my time at Pixologic considering and talking about, especially on the development side, of just thinking about how things work and how things should work from a creative standpoint, not just the functionality, but just the usability of it. And that to us is really important, especially in ZBrush. We want to be able to work differently than we do in other places to make things a little bit better as much as we can. And Rui, you're saying, can we get a slicer view to adjust pieces for 3D printing? Slicer view, if you want to adjust, I don't know exactly what you mean for adjusting pieces. I talk a lot about 3D printing. If you go to my, if you go in here, this particular project here, going through and doing this Mandalorian helmet, this is in my ZBC thread, which was one of my previous streams, actually. This one, unfortunately, the lockdown kind of ruined this one. I was in the process of printing, but I went through the entire process of building it, shelling it out, setting up separate parts with keys, and actually going through, and I was starting to print. I was on a couple parts in, but then I lost access to the Pixologic office and the printers. So unfortunately, I didn't ever get this thing fully completed, but this is here. So this, you can take a look at those streams. Those are actually here in this thread. And they're also in my presenters page, which I posted a link just a little bit above. You're saying when you print, you have overhangs. Yeah, so that kind of stuff in ZBrushCore there's not much that I can really do in ZBrushCore because this is a stripped down version, the full version. So in the full stream of ZBrush, the full version of ZBrush, we could talk about that for sure. If you tune in next Thursday, I'll be on doing my other project, which is in the full version of ZBrush. You're saying almost every slicer program will let you have a progressive view of each layer. Yes. So with ZBrush, we don't do the slicing. In this case, all we can really do on the ZBrush side, we can't do this in Core, but we can do this with the full version with accuracy, is shelling out, getting wall thickness, checking like distances between scale and things like that. So that's something I could do. We could talk about more in that stream. But I would say check out that Mandalorian series. This I'll paste this in there one more time just in case you missed it. This whole thread is documenting pretty much everything, and I pasted the streams in there too. So like I'd say part 3 or 4 was when I started to get into the shelling and doing wall thickness and like making sure things are going to be clean and good for print. Cool, man. That sounds great. And would love to hear your thoughts on it all too. So then I left off with kind of just getting this head done. And now what I want to do is go into we got the final character. When I went through this, I did just a quick dry run of this. It took me a couple days to like put this together to figure out what I was going to do. Pixologic we wanted to spend more time streaming, and ZBrushCore is something that we wanted to spend more time, especially because we spend so much time in the main version of ZBrush. We want to help educate core users as well to the same capacity. So I just put this together in a couple of days. I'm not like honestly, I'm not perfectly happy with all this stuff. I wanted to do more. So I'm going to try and do this a little different than how I did before and show you guys the process. So the way I started was in the dilemma that you're presented with here in Core is we have the benefit of symmetry, so we can sculpt in symmetry until we break it. I want to do a pose for a character, and when you go through the posing process in Core, in the full version of ZBrush, we have a plugin called Transpose Master, and we can use something called Z-Sphere Rigging to sculpt a character in T-pose or A-pose, use our symmetry, and then we can go pose those things after the fact. We can still do that in Core, it's just going to take a different approach. So it's going to take a few more steps and a little more work along the way, or a lot more work depending on your perspective on it. Posing is a challenging thing to do. It's not just like sculpture in general. It takes practice and time to get stuff right. So I want to show you guys as much as I can, just my thought process and things I think will help to kind of make this process a little bit more straightforward and easy. So you can basically start in a couple different ways. Like I've got let's grab a version of this. We have just the basic head here. And the way I started at the beginning was if you're familiar with using Core and sculpting in this way, there's a few different ways to start when you want to do a full body. One way is to actually go in, let's see if I grab you can take a Z-sphere and you can basically go through and block out a figure, and then you can turn this into a skin. So if I go preview this thing, let's go down to adaptive skin. I'll set my density to 1. I'm going to do no dynamesh. You can turn this thing into a skin, and then you can make that into a mesh, and then you can go through and subdivide it. But then you have just essentially a mannequin that is not fleshed out. So you have this stick figure that takes a lot, and if you're not a master sculptor, especially when it comes to humanoid figures and you're doing muscle anatomy and things like that, doing this asymmetrically is quite a challenge. This is something that you learn a lot if you start in the early days, say with clay. If you're doing clay sculpture, you're going to pose it in asymmetry right away, and then you're going to go sculpt asymmetrically. And that's part of the benefit that we're using digital sculpture is to help speed this up. So I want to make use of that symmetry. So using this, I like to block this out. This is just kind of like a quick pose reference for what I'm doing for the final character. And it's an easy way to kind of just block it out, check the angle, just check out kind of the balance and pose. If you guys aren't familiar with Z-spheres, hopefully not too many of you are veterans here, and you're going to be getting some extra basic information. But a Z-sphere is essentially a mannequin tool or an armature tool. So you can, if you click on the toolbox here, you click this open, you get a Z-sphere that brings it up into the canvas. Now, this particular tool makes use of the move, scale, rotate buttons, and the draw button. So the draw button, when you click and drag, it adds a sphere onto the Z-sphere here. So it basically makes a connecting chain. So when you switch to move, scale, or rotate, which are the hotkeys are W, E, and R, W just goes through and moves it out. Scale, click and drag, scales it up and down. So I scale up and down, and then rotate basically looks at a connecting chain here. You'll see we get a little connecting line. Imagine this is like a bone, and this, if I click rotate, depending on the camera view, I can rotate this thing at different angles. So I can basically, with the draw mode, alt click to delete. I can start by just kind of blocking out, like here's like a neck. Let's click and drag with draw mode to make like a little torso. Click and drag on both sides. This will be like, say, like shoulders. Drag down. So the draw size, the bigger the draw size, you see if it encompasses 2 spheres, it's going to pull both of those together. If you set the draw size to 1, then you're pulling one individual sphere. So in this case, like I'm kind of just going in, sketching this thing out. Let's go down, get like a torso. All right, and this is basically the process of going through and blocking this out. So I get to, let's just delete this extra polymesh here. So I get a little shape like this. Now at different angles, once I get these pieces all done, I can go through little tricks you can do that's great with this. And this is using just the basic Z-sphere tool. If you go to rotate, you'll see we have like, I put a sphere here for what would be a hip. Clicking and dragging here is going to move the whole leg. So basically from here on down, if I click on this one, it's grabbing everything connecting to that chain when you use this bone control tool. So if I go down to the next one, that's moving the calves and the ankle and the foot. Right, so I can go through and do little rotations here. I can adjust the arm, things like that. Now there is other quick ways to do this. Ava, you said you got a question about transpose master. When you try to move or rotate a hand, the process is slow and hangs, and hand changes position after the fact, not during. What can be an issue? Poly count. The hand changes position after the fact, not during. If you're using transpose master, you should see those changes happen immediately. So I think in that question, or for that question, Ava, I would need to, so I don't spend too much time on this. I want to help you. If what you should do is, if it's something that's happening and you're not quite sure, you'd be better off to submit a support ticket. So another responsibility that those of us in the development team do is we work in advanced technical support. So if you go to Pixologic support page, you just go here. I'll paste this. Post a ticket in there, and you can reference my name. Just say Solomon said to submit a ticket, and explain to me exactly what's happening. And if you could just give me the file, upload the file to your ticket. You could put it on Dropbox or Google Drive or something and put a share link. I can help you deal with that further. That would probably be the easiest way to go. And Pepper, awesome. I'm so glad you're saying that this is really helpful to watch going through this. This is really great to hear because that's what I'm hoping for. I'm trying not to. I know this is a part of the thing that happens in the digital world, especially with education, is you never really get a chance to see people going through all of it. Now, even I'm kind of skipping over some stuff. Like, for example, if you watch the first stream, I went through and I did let's just get rid of this extra Z-sphere. Get rid of this body. I went through and I blocked out a head, but then I went in this morning and I spent about an hour or two taking that head and like blocking it into a better shape. Like, so actually sculpting this stuff in, which, and what I did do is I time-lapsed this. So my plan is to go to ZBC for you guys next week, and I'll, just like I do here for all my other streams, like my other stream, I'm doing this Luigi crossover with Blade Runner, and I'll be posting a new thread for this topic, and I'm also actually making a tutorial series to make this particular character to completion, so that'll also be available. So then, kind of going through this though, the Z-sphere part is really just a reference point, and you could just take this and turn it into the full body of the character, but it's a lot of sculpture work. So the reason why I'm showing you this is because I like to break this up into primary forms here and actually make separate objects that make it a little bit easier to move stuff around, and I get the benefit of symmetry. So because it could take, an hour or two to kind of quickly, not even quickly, block out this body and just kind of get the flesh and the muscle going. The general process here is, let's go get rid of this. Let me go grab, I think I set up okay, so here's what I did originally. So with Dignity, I posed this guy with all these separate parts as separate objects here with the gizmo transpose all. And I posed him with no clothes and shoes on. That's right, with Dignity. But in this case, I think I'm going to try and do it a little differently. Because the majority of the character is covered up by a lot of these accessories, a lot of parts, I'm not going to spend too much time sculpting on that body and form unless I know I have to. Maybe the character, if you work in a games world, maybe you have to design a character that is supposed to be like maybe shirtless at one point, or some parts might be exposed. It would be in your interest to maybe sculpt the form and do the accessories and have the option. In this case, I'm not forced into those restrictions, so I'm going to simplify this a little bit. But I will go through the body here just briefly. So the way that I like to approach this is, let's go over to, if we left off from last week, basically just kind of going in here and breaking up these forms and adding separate objects here to fill in for a body part, basically. So a neck could be a cylinder, a torso could be a sphere. This is not a new technique. This is a technique that's used by a lot of artists. And it's especially in the stylized world, I think it helps to just make adjustments to certain areas of the character, as opposed to a Z-sphere situation here, where all I can really do is go in and like use a brush on a single object. If I want to go through and inflate out parts, I'm basically working on one shell, and it's hard for me to make quicker adjustments on a whole thing if I could just isolate out a part of the body and work on that and then fuse that stuff together later. I find that to be a little bit easier and more straightforward, especially as you get started as a beginner. So simple stuff, I'm just basically going in for like a neck. I'm going to insert maybe like a cylinder, adjust this, bring this down. You'll see a lot of people, I know some of our other streamers will do this as well. If you watch a lot of our live streams, this piece here is basically just going in. I start with the really low resolution Dynamesh. The goal here is to just get the silhouette and the forms, not the details. So going in and just grabbing like a cylinder here for the neck, and then I'm Dynameshing this, and then kind of going through and adjusting. I like to keep the head separate just in case I want to turn it and do stuff to it later. Going in and just dropping in a sphere, and then we could take this, maybe stretch this thing out, use Gizmo to kind of put it into position, right? So this is going to just be the torso. Now, immediately, I'm going to go into Dynamesh. I'm going to do Dynamesh 32, smooth this thing out. And then basically from here, I'm just starting to use the move brush to form this into a torso. All right, so that's essentially what we have here. So if I turn these guys off, we have a torso starting to flesh this out, and we have this piece here that's resembling what eventually will be a neck. So for the torso stuff, like especially for a stylized character, to kind of talk quickly about the Dynamesh polish feature, something I like to do for this is like you want to flesh this stuff out. In the torso portion, for example, if you know your anatomy well enough, trying to define the rib cage and get the barrel sort of flow where it looks less like a sphere and more like a natural torso is kind of crucial. So going in and like I might just start to like kind of rough in with, I'm using Damien's standard brush to kind of go in and just sketch out. That's where the rib cage is going to go. I cut it off here. If you're familiar with this, the rib cage basically does go all the way back, through the body, right? All the ribs kind of travel through. But what you normally only see is that front part of the rib cage, especially for a somewhat heroic masculine character. You're going to have basically lat muscles that are going to kind of cover up that chunk of the rib cage in the back. So kind of just going on Damien standard, I'm sketching out the ribs. I'm going to sketch out just the abdomen. And then I know for sure that I'm going to have some kind of like hip flexor happening about here. All right, so I can sketch these things in. We can also go in and like once I sketch in, I'll maybe just smooth it out. And then let's go in, and from that side view, you can even do stuff like this if you want the ribs to be a little bit more defined. Once you have those lines in, going in with just a mask lasso, and let's go in and just mask off maybe like that top part of the ribs. Control-click to blur. Then we can go in with, say, a move brush, and now we can start to like pull this out, right? So if you want that to be a little bit more sort of pronounced and defined, and you could do the same thing for like abdomen area. Control-click to blur. You could bring this in just a little bit, but then maybe if you want it to, just go in with like a clay build-up brush and kind of give it a little bit more shape and form. We can do this kind of stuff as well. So the hips, I usually want to go in with like I use the clay build-up brush a lot for stuff like this, just to block in just volume and form. So I want to start defining those hips. And not spending too much time. The legs themselves, I don't want to spend too much time in one area. The legs will be including that sort of like leg bone going into this section here. I'm going to just do a separate piece. That's essentially what I'm trying to break it up into large pieces that can kind of hold most of that shape. Now with the trying to get into more of the stylized stuff, if we go in, we can take this for some pieces. Like right now, what I like about having this as a separate piece, if I want to play around with like the trap muscles, just looking at this shape here, I don't have to deal with doing any masking across the neck and this part. I can just use the move brush and I can move this stuff around, smooth it out. I get a little bit more freedom to kind of mess around with this stuff. So that's really what the benefit is here. Now, from here, what I'll probably do is like, let's just go in Damien standard brush and start to like lay in some kind of foundation here. Maybe I'll bring this closer together. If this is looking good, there's nothing wrong with combining some of these parts. Like you could take this neck and this torso just to make it, because those muscles that clitosternomastoid, the one that goes behind your ear and down to your collarbone here, it's a heck of a word to say, but that muscle that kind of travels here, it's connecting to the surface. So you can signify some of these things while it's in a separate form. You can kind of go in, sketch this stuff out. But some parts like the neck, I kind of like to have connected to the torso. So I can take this piece, I can merge this down, and then we can re-dynamesh that thing to get that together. And now for the polishing effect, this is where like, I think that's a little too spaced apart there. If we want to start to get a little bit more of that stylized look. Little trick you can do with that, let's go into geometry, dynamesh. I'm going to turn on this polish setting here. Actually, let's see what it does before. So with Damien Standard, if you hold Alt, it does a nice little extruded line, a thin little sort of controlled line. Now, if I hold Alt and I paint this, it's going to go through and raise a surface. So as I raise that surface, it's creating a sharper sort of edge. Now, if you just dynamesh this without polish, you get this kind of result. But if you were to go turn that polish on and do it, it's going to force a lot of those edges to converge. So basically, it's looking for edges, or vertex points rather, that are closer together, and it pulls them even closer during that polishing. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that so much. Yeah, you're asking, are these streams you're doing being archived anywhere to review again later? Absolutely. I posted those here in the chat, but let me send them to you again. If you go to, this is my presenters page, and this will definitely be available after the stream. Usually it takes us about a day to post this thing up. In that link that I just sent you guys, you'll see this right here. So this is the first one, kind of going through the head. These are my other streams, my ZBrush, my full version of ZBrush streams. So the Mandalorian helmet, you know, I've done some like footwear stuff, Star-Lord sort of cosplay. My most recent one is this crossover with Super Mario and Blade Runner. So this stuff right here. I'm trying to do a whole scene combining the two. But all that stuff is there, so everything will be there. And you're very welcome. I appreciate you guys checking those out. And those links will send you to YouTube, which those will be on YouTube forever, as far as I know. Metal Dragon, you're saying, do I prefer the Dame Standard or /3? That's a good question. For this particular stuff, when I'm just doing like, if I want to do just angles, stylized sort of angles, I prefer Damien Standard. The /3 has a, and actually in this one, we don't have the, in ZBrushCore, we don't have the /3, but in the full version, we do. And even in that case, I still prefer Damien Standard for this kind of stuff, simply because I think this one has a little bit more of, the angle isn't as steep. So the transition /3 is a little bit better to like actually create slashes and cuts in the surface. This one, I think, has a little bit more control to do these kinds of like angled lines here. And that really depends on the draw size. So a bigger draw size does a bigger stroke effect. And you'll see I'm going to go through and pull that up, and then I control drag. And with polish, it brings that edge up, and you'll see it makes a nice, clean little line. So the higher resolution we go, the better this stuff works. But I don't want to go too far. This is kind of the point here, is to not get too far ahead of yourself when you're blocking out the forms. Because when you get too high in resolution, it gets harder to move stuff around. It gets harder to clean up any messy sculptures any sculpture details you apply. You get what you call lumpy sculpting, which that's pretty much every time I sculpt in clay. And so I do this, and this is an old-fashioned technique, old-fashioned in the digital age, to stay low resolution as long as you can. Really try to stay low resolution as long as you can until that silhouette and all those parts start to look good. So like for this, I might, since it's stylized, I'm not going to do like all the same like bony structures. Like everything's not going to be as defined. But for now, let's kind of go in here. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn project on. So every time I Dynamesh, I want it to project those previous details to kind of try and keep. You'll see that both projection on, you get from here, you get these extra little controlled triangles here that hold those edges even better. So with project on, you'll start to get, basically you get this, the benefit of using this little sub projection, which sub projection is going to put more of these vertex points that are triangulated in those areas where it needs it to hold it, while keeping all these other surfaces evenly distributed and lower. So it helps keep the resolution low, but it helps hold the edges where you want the brushes and the details to go. So if you're familiar with Sculptress, it's kind of like a hybrid of that in a way, Dynamesh and kind of Sculptress in a way. So then here I can go in, I'm going to start kind of getting away, carving away for where you'd have a collarbone here, and you have a little sort of triangulated point where you get the traps that go to the shoulder blades, and then they cut down. And they go sort of up like this, right? And then you can go in with Damien's standard brush and kind of create that little divide between the two as they converge onto the spine, that kind of stuff. I mean, anatomy's, you know, anatomy. It's not the most, I don't know, I think I've grown to love it, but even, and I'm not, I by no means consider myself a good anatomist sculptor, but I have been getting better. I've seen myself grow over the years as I pay attention to more of these things, I take more classes, or I just sculpt. If you sculpt this stuff enough, it kind of becomes muscle memory, pun intended. But, yeah, so like as I kind of keep fleshing this out, you'll notice though, each time I re-Dynamesh, it's going to continue to polish. And this can be a little bit of a problem because you start losing some of those lines that you have. Each time it polishes a previously polished one even more. And that's not necessarily great. So one thing that you should consider when you're using this feature, it's just my suggestion, is if you're going through this process, don't try to polish right away. You know what it's going to look like after kind of watching it happen and trying it a few times, but I would suggest turning polish off and just doing maybe one polish towards the end. So like I'm going to kind of go back here and use Damien's standard to kind of cut that in. And just lay that back in there. All right, so now we lost a little bit here, so I'll kind of go redefine some of this. And let's just project it with polish on, and we'll just kind of leave this as is. All right, so this is basically the process. All right, so I get a torso. It's not perfect by any means. I find that it's not easy to solidify each major shape until you have the other ones to see. So moving on, like the next thing that I would do is if you just move on to say like a leg. And this is one thing I forgot to mention to you guys watching, something I spoke about more in my previous stream. Let's see if this comes up here. If you take a look, this is just actual characters from, I'm sorry, I don't know the artist names that created the characters for the game. These are pretty well-known characters that I've seen, at least in the Fortnite sort of pantheon of artwork. There's so much of it. There's endless characters for this game. But as a reference point, if you're going for this kind of style and some things that you can do, this is a traditional technique as well as like trying to figure out proportion. Proportion to me is always pretty challenging, like how long the torso should be, trying to exaggerate some of the proportions of the legs and things like that. There's normal rules of thumb, but in this case, what you'll see is in the image, you'll see you could basically break down by just cutting out the head and creating a duplicate of the head. Like if you follow the old, I'll duplicate this head here. The Jack Kirby, like Marvel hero sort of form. I think they do it. A superhero is normally 8 heads tall or 9 heads tall. It ranges from like 7 to 8 to 9, depending on how big the character is. The bigger it is, 9 heads tall is usually, I think, like the biggest. This one you'll see on the right, the blue guy, he should be 8. But what I like about this is it kind of helps to if you duplicate those heads and you line up the parts of the body that fit within that range, you can kind of sort of give yourself a number. Like the torso, if you look at the blue guy, is about 2 heads in sort of height length. So you can look at that and go, okay, well, my torso should be about, so we have just like a duplicate of our head. I'm going to take this thing and just go turn Dynamesh Res down. Let's get rid of these creepy eyes and then remesh it. There we go. So you get like just a duplicate head. Now a little trick you can do with Gizmo, this is something I showed in the last stream, is I want to just do 8 heads. So if I hold control and drag, this is really important. You hold control, keep dragging while holding control, and then once you get it to the position where you want it to go, you let go of control and keep dragging downwards. And then you'll get a duplicate special, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then control drag to clear. So now you get those heads. So you can kind of use this as a marker. You should go like, okay, the torso, if I want my proportions to be on you guys, actually, my bad. You can't, let's turn this body proportion off real quick so you can see this. So one more time, if I have this guy in position, if I hold control, drag downwards, and then once it's in the position, I want to go just to make it like a duplicate in line, and then let go of control, keep dragging. And then we should get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then control drag to clear. So you're just duplicating a single subtool. And this will help just to kind of go through and just give you that marker. So then going back to that body proportions, like if I wanted to sort of have that same look and feel, I can take a look at this and go, okay, well, their torso is about 2, maybe 2.5 heads tall. So what you can do is a little trick. You can go to polygroup. You can auto group these heads, and we can control shift click on this, reverse, control shift click on that, and then control shift alt drag, and maybe get rid of a half head. So I'm reversing this. This is showing me basically my heads should be about the same length as what that torso is in the height, which is pretty close. All right, so that'll help. In this case, this character I'm doing is, I'm kind of referencing the one on the right side there. You should see, or the left side, the shorter guy, you'll see he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5, almost 7 heads tall. All right, so this is really just a technique that you can use to try and help yourself gauge how your stuff is proportioned out. So then I'll use that to help with, like, especially the length of the legs. Yeah, sorry, Marie, I just noticed that myself. The this one here, so I was covering up a little bit of that. But essentially, hopefully, did you see at least the duplicating of these parts? Basically, what I want to do here is, once I duplicate those heads, I go polygroup, I auto group these, which gives them each a unique polygroup. And what I'll do is, I know that the torso, at least for that guy, was 2.5 heads tall. So control shift, or we can control shift drag. No, actually in this version we can't. Control shift click, reverse, click on this one to hide it, and control shift alt to reverse that head. And this is giving me a little marker here. Okay, sweet. Thanks, Marie. Yes, so the next step is like going in and figuring out those extra parts. So I just go through, insert, I'm going to grab just a cylinder maybe for the leg. And I'll stretch this thing out. And I'll take this now. Let's just go Dynamesh it low. I start everything at 32. And then we can smooth this thing out. And now what I'll do is I'll start by, now there's going to be a glute in there. Have this sort of snug up against the hip. Now then just kind of, I'm taking the move brush, starting to sort of flesh this out. You can pull up some image reference for leg muscles, that kind of stuff. All right, so I have like a little board that's got, he's thick, I know, he might be. The original piece was not, but this is where the stuff kind of starts to, this is where you get to kind of play around with those ideas, like how thick do you want it to be, or do you want them to be skinny? This is all a part of this process right now. I think I want to go for that strong kind of superhero build. So I'm going to start by just like, you know, this is where I go in looking at some leg muscles. I know that there's a little striation there. There's usually a little teardrop section there. And you'll get something that kind of goes like this, right, in that sort of range. But, you know, you can kind of go in and sketch out this muscle. Sometimes I'll go in and just kind of fill this stuff in and then rearrange later. Like, I know that I'm going to do, I'm also considering that I'll be doing clothing on top of this. So I really don't care too much about the details in the muscle. I just want to have the forms kind of there, so it's in the right place. So everything that, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract everything off of this body. So all the clothing, all the elements of this character, if you look at like these parts, they all need something to wrap around the shell there. So having the body in the form is a great place to just get your other stuff from. So you want to have stuff close. It doesn't have to be perfect. You know, it really depends on how much you need that extra, you know, detail from the character's body and form. Like I was saying earlier, you don't necessarily always need that stuff underneath the clothing. Like maybe it's just what is the character wearing, and this is just like a first stage to kind of get this stuff in place, and then we go from there. So that's kind of what I want to do here today. So then going from here, like this is where I can start to, while you're in this phase, if I turn the heads off, I always think about like posture too. Like if I want to have him look natural as possible. Eventually I'm going to pose him into, you know, the pose we have for our character here, you know, giving him that kind of upright sort of natural pose. But for now, I just want to keep this stuff straight up and down, and I'll keep sort of fleshing this stuff out. So I don't want to spend too much time on going through this, but let's do one more. One thing that I'd like to do here when you're doing a symmetry, eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror this over. So go into Geometry, Modify Topo. Just so you guys know, there's a couple of things that, like, if you are ZBrushCore users, you might notice that the brush palette here at the bottom is a little different than what you get in the default, and also I've added a custom set of elements here. So these are things that I don't like to go back and forth. Like a lot of times I'll do a split hidden and delete hidden. So delete hidden is in Modify Topology, and split hidden is in Subtool split hidden here. So instead of going back and forth through menus, if I want those buttons here, just making a quick custom UI, go into Config, turning on Configuration, Enable Customize. If I hold Control-Alt, I'll get rid of those. Basically, I want split hidden, so Control-Alt-Click, and I can drag this into any box that's framed here in white. And then going to Geometry, Modify Topo, Control-Alt, bring this delete hidden down here. All right, so I can bring buttons. A couple other things that I do. I put a hotkey to mirror and weld because I do this a lot. So if you hold Control-Alt and click on this button, I'm using Control-Shift-W. So when I press Control-Shift-W, you're going to see the leg flip over. So I like to just quickly check, like as I'm sculpting, I want the legs to sort of have a natural kind of like fold here as they converge at that symmetry line and mirror over. Right, so the problem is that when you have them both at the symmetry line, trying to bring stuff close together, it's a little bit harder, I find, to like sculpt and model when you can't see. Like I want to be able to rotate around there and I can't see. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go through, I'll check the width of that thigh, mirror it over. If it's far enough, like I don't want it to, basically what I'm afraid of doing is I'm afraid of it to weld across. So if I go too far, so I'm pressing undo. I got to turn symmetry off here. So if you take a look, somebody did a question about custom eye colors. If you look in preferences, there's no eye colors palette here. So all we have the ability to do is control the buttons and layouts. We can also change the interface colors, the scripts. Those are the only ways that you could change those colors. That was to Logan. All right, so I'm pressing Control-Shift-W to check it, but then I'm undoing it just so I don't have to deal with that other side until I'm absolutely ready. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so I'm going to stop fiddling with this leg. His legs are pretty girthy at this point. Could hold Shift and kind of smooth it out, just round that thing out. And then moving on down, I would do, this again is important for those heads. So if we're bringing up that reference here really quick, I'll try not to cover this up this time. From the waist down to about where the knee is, let's say it's about 2.5 heads. So waist here, we could go 1, 2, So we'll go 1, 2, get rid of this, reverse that, and you'll get roughly about where that waist is kind of hitting, like it's about in the right place. So I could take this thing if I wanted to do it. This is, again, for an 8 heads tall. I'm not going to make it as big. I would want to pull that thing all the way down to this line. Yeah, no worries, Logan. Yes, so I assume that you use ZBrushCore and ZBrush? Maybe you have like Core at home, ZBrush at work, something like that. Okay, so then the last thing I'll mention here is I'm going to just insert, like, I would do this exact same process, and I'd go through, and let's just go take a look at the body so we don't waste too much time here. I'd go through and I block out the legs here, so I got those done. I'd take a cylinder or a sphere, whatever works. Okay, you did a trial and subbed. Nice. Well, we thank you for the sub. So this is like, you'll see like these calves are actually, I kind of cheated a little bit. I was like, I know that sculpting feet is a nightmare. I'm already going to have to do the hands, which is enough for me. So in this case, like, what I'm trying to avoid is spending extra time sculpting feet. So I just kind of covered it up with boots. So you'll see his ankles were all kind of janky and messed up. I could even delete those or basically hide those. Go Geo. This is where that delete hidden is great. I can get rid of the hidden and then control drag to Dynamesh, and I can seal that up. So you get a nice clean little ankle. All right, so this is the thought process here. So same thing I did every major muscle group. A sphere comes into a deltoid. The bicep and the arm, you'll see these get a little bit more. I like to actually take a cylinder and smooth that out to get a nice clean shape. Because what happens is if you were to go in and just turn these guys off, say we just do a merge visible, and go take these things now, and just say you wanted to go through and just make them one mesh. If you Dynamesh them, you just got a lot of like nice shape and form. If I go through and just do a little polish, even just like maybe just smooth this out with a brush, and maybe reduce resolution a little bit, you get a really nice effect that happens with the anatomy. That is, I find, especially in my experience as a beginning ZBrush sculptor, years ago, trying to sculpt all this stuff on a single shell is harder to see where things go. But if you understand and look at where the muscles connect and the points, it's a lot easier to visualize if you have separate subtools, and then you can just merge the stuff together and you get a pretty nice result. So then even like doing that for things like the hands. All right, so looking at the hands here, this I think is a little overkill. Like I went through and I did separate little meaty parts for the fingers and little chunks here for the palm. And this to me is just, I'm probably going to do the hands a different way because they're going to be posed. So I think a Z-sphere setup or a combination of Z-sphere setup will probably be the way to go here towards the end. So then going back to the, let's go grab the body. We got this stuff done. Now, what I did was, as I showed you guys earlier, I went straight to the pose with no clothes and shoes on. Right? Then I went in and I extracted out the parts asymmetrically and built the clothes asymmetrically. In this presentation, I think what I want to try is just go do it symmetrically so I can kind of put my money where my mouth is and make use of that symmetry to kind of speed up the process. And then we'll do the posing after the fact. So we'll still have to pose in ZBrush without Transpose Master, but we can use Gizmo Transpose All to do this process. So once I get all this stuff done, I think what I need to consolidate some of these parts so I can make extractions. So I can extract off the whole top torso for the shirt, and then maybe the legs down to the ankles for the pants. Come on, autosave. So what I think I'll do here is I'm just going to go do let's see, which one is this? Let's go. I'm going to clean up this tree here so we can only see the posed and the symmetry. So in this tool, I've got you'll see I have all my parts kind of assigned in folders. So if you don't know how to make a folder, if you just click a subtool, you can click new folder, and let's call this head stuff. And then I can click and drag any subtool into this folder, and I can realign these. So I basically created all these parts, and I put arms in a folder. I put the rest of the character parts in this folder too. So then what I'll do is I'm going to go take basically with everything visible, I'm going to go to Subtool, do a Merge Visible. We'll get this guy all as one object. And then this will just be a temporary. I'm going to Dynamesh it, try it at 128 and see how that works. 128 is pretty good. The question here is how much, let's just try this out. So this guy has got a lot of definition here. I'm going to smooth out that transition there at the neck. Basically all the transitions for these parts connecting. I would probably need to go in now, and if you were gonna use this technique to make a base mesh, it's a great way to do it, and then you can merge it, and now you've got something to work with that's got more volume and shape. But stuff like this, for like the knees, I'd probably have to go through and kind of just like re-sculpt out some of these other components. I would probably try and reduce resolution a little bit, re-Dynamesh, without destroying too much of this stuff. All right, now these details that are coming in from these shapes, if I smooth these guys across, are going to show up in this extraction. So first and foremost, like I want to just give him a little t-shirt. I want to do some armor parts on top of that and pants. So let's just give him some dignity here. We'll start with some pants. I'll go Subtool. This is really your best option. If you take a look at the brush palette, we don't have topology brushes. We have the ability to extract to get a piece with thickness. That's going to be our best bet. So going into Subtool, extract. Let's check this at 0.2. That's a little too balloon pants for me. I'm going to go take this to 0.09. Actually, no, I need to go 0.009. Click extract. There we go. That's pretty good. So let's click accept. Now you get some pants. Now the problem with this is you'll see like as it extracts off of something that has a lot of surface detail, you'll see it picks up all the little sculpted muscle striations and these kinds of things. If I want to do, I just want to do some maybe some military kind of pants if I'm going for that Fortnite character, or just like something a little bit more loose and natural. So to do that, instead of for this body, since I'm just using this as a temporary piece, what I'm going to do is go to Dynamesh. I'm going to reduce this resolution quite a bit. And we should be able to just take this now. Let's do like a deformation. Just do a little polishing. Maybe even just kind of go in with the shift key using the smooth brush here, just to like tidy up some of these surfaces. And one thing to note too is the extract, what it does two things. It extracts off of the existing topology. So the higher resolution the piece is, but when you extract it, the higher resolution your extraction will be. So going back to the first piece, that first piece was a lot more dense than this one will be. So if I go in with let's go in with mask pen here, mask lasso, and just lasso out some pants. And it also, so if I click extract again and click accept, it takes the polygroups too. So the polygroups will create a little smoothed edge of those borders, which I'm going to delete this one more time, clear this. And I'm going to press Control W to give this whole thing a solid polygroup. So now when I get an extraction, I should only get 2 polygroups on the in and outside and 1 on the border. So you get 1 here, and 1 here. All right, now one other thing that I turn on in my custom UI, if you go to preferences, enable customize, I go to tool palette, display properties, and I take this double button and I put this over here. So if I Control Shift click on this, for example, you'll see it doesn't show the front facing surface normals. But if you turn on double side, it's going to show both sides of those faces. So for me, I like to see all parts of the mesh so I don't miss anything or get confused. So I'm going to keep double on. And I'll just so you know, I'm turning that on over here sometimes in that palette. Now this piece is got it's pretty ballooned out. So I'm going to go to geometry, Dynamesh this thing. Whoa, that's way too high. Let's go to say 16. If you go too low and surfaces are close together, you'll get a weld. So let's go. We could try and just smooth that out a little bit. Let's go down to maybe 80. That's pretty good. And I'm just going to kind of go through and smooth this stuff out. Control drag. Okay, so we get a little extraction for pants. Then what I'll do is we'll come back to modifying this here in a second. Let's just get a shirt in there. So I'm going to go into the character. We could inverse this. So Control click to inverse a mask, and then Control Alt to go through and deselect here. Control Alt to deselect here. I'm just curious, like the shirt that I did was, it was like, I like that low hanging sort of neck, that collar. So we could go in and maybe do it like about there. All right, and then let's do subtool. Same thickness. Click accept. Clear that. Now I'm going to go in and just dynamesh this down to about 32. Maybe let's try 16. See, 16 is too low because the arms down here will sort of weld. Let's go up to like 64. That's a little bit better. Okay, so we got our simple extractions. There's a lot to do after this. And he's also, because the figure was so defined, the shirt comes in that way too. So if I want to reduce that, I'm going to have to do some sculpting on this here eventually and probably reduce a lot of the stuff with a lower res dynamesh. All right, so then now let's see, those shoulders are looking really, really ripped. It's a little too much. So going in with like a move brush. I want to start to get rid of like these lines here where it's sort of converging on the muscle, like the spine sort of lines. So I just really want to go in and like smooth stuff out and or move things around till it starts to look a little bit more natural. But this will take some time to kind of finesse. You could turn on transparency at this phase to kind of go in and see where that thing sits. If you turn ghost on or off, you get a little bit of a different result. But you could go in and just to like check how things are sitting against that surface. All right, so without too much messing around with this, we got our quick parts here. Actually, I don't know if I didn't want sleeves. I think I wanted that to be like a short sleeve shirt. What we could do here is if you go in and if you do, we could go back to this guy and we could just do a different variation. Maybe we'll keep both. Just cut off those sleeves. Extract, accept, and I'll keep that just as a backup for now. All right, so we got shirt, pants. Now I'm going to go back to my tool over here. And actually, you know what? Let's not, we'll use this as the new piece because this character, we're only going to keep some parts. I'm not going to keep all the body parts underneath. Eventually, I'll probably dump some of those things once we get the pose in place. But for now, what I want to do is I want to probably start to like, just make this like, look like it's tucked in a little bit. So do a little masking. You could turn gizmo on and set that to the center. Kind of go through and just kind of bring this in. Maybe inverse. Go in with like an inflate brush. Maybe with like a move brush to kind of start forcing those curves to start going down. And we can clear that mask. Move this stuff down. All right, now the pants, of course, I'm going to have to do some work on those. But next thing I want to do is I want to start getting those boots into place. So these boots here, this is, oh, looks like that got extracted. I'm going to select this. Dafu Kansan, you're saying, is there a way to move the border of the outer and inner shell when using a small brush? I usually use a single shell to move things into place and then extrude to avoid pushing verts at the cut points on top of each other. Yes, so in this case, because we're in ZBrushCore, we don't have ZModeler, so we can't do a ZModeler extrude. We can't do any additional extractions. What you could do, this is where I would use like polygroups for something like that, if I'm understanding you correctly. So like you have an inner shell, and then you have an outer shell, and then you have a polygroup border. So what I would do is like if I wanted to maybe make that thicker, for example, if you want to just thin everything out, you can go to deformation and just do like inflate negative, and that'll thin the shell. But let's say I grab this outer piece, mask it off, show everything, and I could do control click to blur it a little bit. And here I could go in and do just a little inflate to kind of bulge that out further. Or what you could do is if you just wanted to do it at, say, like this border here, I could go in with, say, a move brush now, and I could just start to, from that top view, I could start to kind of bulge this out with a move brush and bring it out. So I think with your question, or with your point, you're probably speaking more to your experience in ZBrush, the full version of ZBrush, which your method is probably the most, I guess, efficient in terms of like less cleanup if you were to do it that way. In Core, this is the best option we have to play around with that border. Otherwise, the only thing that you get to do if you want a specific thickness is to mask something off, go to Subtool, and I could extract again, or let's go undo that, mask it, and then extract this piece on top of it, and then weld another piece together. But in this case, that's not going to work out for these pants. They're already ballooned out enough. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know, and I'll maybe you can explain that in a different way, and I could show you. I assume this is what you mean with at those shell borders. So I want to get rid of these boots. I'm going to hide those with selection. I'm going to do delete hidden, and the character itself, like I'm going to go get rid of the temp boots here. Delete hidden. Let's re-dynamesh that, and I'm going to go back to my test build, where I just, these were just created with a cylinder and like, I think another cylinder here and a cylinder across. And then I just kind of reshaped it. All right. So I mean, I don't know if you guys care, but it was basically like taking a piece like this to kind of stretch out. And then I did a little duplication, brought this thing down. If you want to get that sort of like boot toe curve, sometimes I like to get a shape that's closer to it before I start moving stuff around. So I dynameshed it, and then I cut this thing in half, inverse, and I can stretch this thing out. And then let's dynamesh this thing again. And little things you could do, like if you want to just shape like the shape of a shoe a little bit better, this is something that I like to do. It's like it really gets into the nitty gritty, but say you're looking at it from the top view and you do a big draw size and you move the shell. If you notice the curvature that happens, it kind of tapers on the shoe. So if you want to move the whole piece all the way through, in the full version of ZBrush, we have a brush called Move Infinite Depth, which takes care of that stuff for us. But for this piece, like you could go in, turn on Gizmo to compensate for this. And we could turn on Gizmo and do Deformer Soft. And here you can control essentially going in and just assigning different edge loops at different axes. And then you could Control-Alt, drag to paint over edges, and we can go in and start to like reshape like this. Or we could go in and do, let's add a few more edges here. So the real quick with this one, with Gizmo Deformers, if for this particular one, Deformer Soft, if you click on a point, that selects it. You can drag it to move it. So you can reshape stuff like this. Oh, Move Infinite Depth is what you wanted. Okay. Well, cool. I'm glad I inadvertently did that. Sorry about that. So clicking on a single point, if you shift click, it adds to the selection. Control drag clears. Control Alt over points selects those. And then Control drag over them. Well, basically what this does, if I Control drag over this, it'll select everything but these parts. So you see you get these selections. So those are your controls. So you can go in and just like start to like move stuff around, play around with this, kind of reshape. So you can start to like play around with this sort of depth. And then of course you could just smooth this thing out too. And you could still go in. Actually, we would need to apply this. And then after you made changes to it, go back to Deformer Soft and start to like reshape some of the stuff. All right. So this was like, I played around with that a little bit to kind of get this thing, get a little bit more curvature on it, but we could probably do it just like this. I just did a little merge down, dynamesh these pretty low, and then we're basically just going to start to like give this thing a little bit more curvature, smooth that thing out until you get like a decent shape for that boot. All right, I'm going to spend a little bit more time, of course, probably with a move brush, move this stuff around. So basically I went through, I got that to a, an okay spot. It's not the best, but from here, I want to talk about just fleshing out these boots to get to, I think I have those here in the scene. Maybe we could do one build for this today. Nope, not that. Here it is. All right. So using Core to get just the features that we have in Core to get a nice boot with some extra details. So we get some nice treads, and then we've got a nice shape that we can then go through and do other stuff on top of. But I think this will serve as a good stage 2 to start getting some details in here. So to do this, what I want to do is, let's go back to there's my new scene I'm setting up. I'm going to just take these boots with them selected over here. I can go to my new tool. I'm going to go to subtool, append. I'm going to bring in those boots. All right, and let's just position these. And for now, I'm going to just select one of them, delete hidden, and just work on one side. All right, so to do those guys, that's like the, I think the iconic sort of like Fortnite boot. Let's see, what do I want to do first? So I really want to get a nice clean heel in place, so that'll kind of frame out the bottom. So control drag, I'm going to just make a selection. I'm going to do subtool, extract, and find the right thickness. Let's go 0.09. That's pretty good. Click accept. All right, now I'm going to take this one and let's go do a geometry. We could turn on, let's turn on Dynamesh here. You see we get some kind of wonky wavy lines. With the extraction, you can turn up the smoothness here. So if we just go into this and we increase that smoothness, and then click extract, and then click accept, you see you get a different result. So you end up getting this maybe a more tapered kind of edge, right? So it'll kind of help smooth out the transition between those pieces. That actually looks okay. I kind of like that. Although it's not, it's a little wavy and imperfect still. Let's go back here. Crank up that smoothness to 100. Click accept. That versus this, it's about the best we're going to get. Okay, so we'll leave this guy as is. I'm going to control drag. Now I'm going to take this thing. I'm going to go to, actually, this taper is going to be too much to clean up. I think I'm just going to keep the straight flat boot heel here. And then let's Dynamesh this thing. So that piece is good. Now I want to clean up those wavy lines. I'm going to control drag over these faces. With Core, the best options we have to flatten and clean up surfaces, if you hold Alt to click, or Alt click to bring the gizmo here. If you Alt click to refresh, if you grab the Y scale toggle and drag it towards the center, essentially what it's doing is grabbing all the vertex points in the unmasked area, and it's bringing those to this Y symmetry line. So bringing them right to that level area. So you can control or just click and drag to flatten. Let's clear it. And then if you turn on polish and remesh it, you should get nice sharp edges. So I'm going to do the same thing for the base here. So I'm going to control shift click on this outer group. Let's go turn double side on so we can see this. And I just want to mask off the base here. Then bring everything back. That way I don't touch anything on the inside here. So then I'm going to Alt click to bring gizmo, Alt click and drag to reposition it. And if I scale down, you'll see that those edges are going to scale towards that line. And then I can reposition or move it around. Then control drag, and then with polish on, I'll just run it with that polish. All right, so you could go in and do, if you want to smooth this stuff out, we could do deformation, do just a little bit of global polish here, which will kind of like soften up those edge borders, but clean up any excess parts that are not looking perfect yet. And let's see, so we got this in place. Now, here's where I would probably just take a look at this thing with only these parts. And the shape isn't quite there yet. I'll probably start playing around with this just a little bit more. So I want to maybe just mask off this toe. I like to do a lot of control clicking and blurring to kind of just go through and maybe bring this toe up a little bit, clear it, if I want to reshape any of these components. Oh, we'll let this quick save. All right, now to start by getting those, like, I want to get those boot treads going in here. That stuff is going to take a little bit more. If we had the full version of ZBrush, we could do a whole lot more, but we can still do this in Core for sure. The first thing is getting that piece going. So I'm going to look at, I want to just take a look at one of these little tread reference pieces. So essentially, if you look at the boot, the completed boot, trying to get one of these guys going here. These actually have some curvature. We'll talk about how to get that curvature working. But I just need to get a nice little, like, sort of stair step kind of piece going. So let's go. I'm going to grab a selection lasso here, and I'm going to grab this here. And we could do a little Shift S. Actually, no, in solo, in this version, we can't do a snapshot. So then I'm just going to have to eyeball this. Let's go bring in let's do insert. I'm going to bring in a cube. And let's start by just doing that front tread. So I'm going to get this to be about the right sort of height, at least to this. And I want to have, like, kind of going back to this piece here, I want to have a nice little plateau and a flat edge here. So really what I need is a way to flatten these guys at a specific angle. So let me clean up my tool here so we can see this. Okay, so just these parts. Now taking this thing, let's go Dynamesh. Let's go a little bit higher. And we could, now what I want to do is get a nice clean flattened edge. So this is a trick that you can do with Gizmo and Transpose. This is probably the best flattening feature we have in Core. So if you look at the H polish brush, for example, let's go in and do just H polish. Like if you just go in and try and, like, flatten out this edge, you can smooth this thing out and try and do a little flatten. There is also the trim dynamic. This one can kind of start to get that, but it's really, really hard to make that one clean slice. And if you use the full version of ZBrush, we don't have the slice curve brushes either. So without those, and just by doing this with Gizmo, with Dynamesh here, I'm going to turn on Gizmo, center it to the object. I'm going to Alt-click and angle any one of these axes points, so Z or Y, angle it in the degree that I want. So if you hold Alt and then hit Shift, you can lock it to every 5 degrees. So I can make it Alt and Shift, make this 45. And then if you turn Gizmo off, this defaults to the Transpose tool. Now with the Move option for Transpose tool, basically when you have the axis being in the center of the object traveling, the axis being, so we'll call this the starting point. So this is circle 1, 2, and 3. Wherever circle 1 is, if you click and drag this piece, basically what this does is it flattens along the transpose path towards the center of this object. So I can go in and do a little flattening here. And I'm just, let's see, this little curve point is, yeah, that piece was like kind of thick. So we can go in here and just do like a little flatten here at the top. All right, then turn Gizmo back on. Or what I would probably do here is Dynamesh this with, let's try it with Polish. Actually, Polish is not going to be good. Let's try it with Project. Hound Mask, so it will be possible to watch the stream later. That will be available here on this is on my presenter page. This is all my previous recaps. Probably give it a day or so, and it should be up. The first part of this stream is already there. You'll see that, and you should see the image of this this character we're working on. So then if I Alt-click with Shift and I go down to whatever degree I want, say here, let's turn Gizmo off, and now we can go in with Transpose and do this flattening, say here at the base. And probably I just want to make sure that this cube has enough resolution. So let's go no polish. I don't want to polish it. Let's go up in resolution. There we go. And let's try it like this. Now you could also, while in transpose mode, you can click to change to the additional angles in this way. So I can go here and I could start to like flatten out this curve. I could go up here and I could flatten out this curve as well. So you get just a little like boot piece that's got some texture and some detail. All right, so as far as you want to take this, any other additional things that I want to do, I'm going to go back to Gizmo, might refresh this. So refreshing resets it to world axis. And then I could go here and do like a little flattening on that front face. Go here, do a flattening from the top down. And then to the bottom, and let's do this little piece here. So I'm just trying to clean up these edges a little bit. Yeah, Electric Rat, you're saying it's a neat trick. This is a nice one. This one's actually been around for a while. I'm glad to know that that's some useful tricks for you guys. This one is, again, this is the best way we have in Core to do an even flatten. If you're in the full version of ZBrush, when you hold Control-Shift, you'll get clip curves, you'll get all kinds of like flattening tools. Slice curve to like close off a piece, or trim curve brushes rather. When you have like stuff like this, if you have an angle, you can, like if you were to just go in with, you can't do it with a lasso, but if you just hold selection lasso, hide apart, delete hidden, and re-dynamesh, it will close holes. All right, but you can really only do those kinds of straight lines with selection rectangles, and it's hard to do that at, let's say, an angle like this. And trying to do that with a lasso, if you want to just go across and delete hidden and remesh it, it's not quite going to be perfect. So this trim curve, I think, will be a lot better. So just getting like a little bit of a sort of detailed piece here. Now what I'm going to do is go back to regular Gizmo. Let's start by, I'm going to start by just kind of aligning these pieces around the shoe. So I'm going to start with the toe. Let's duplicate that. The duplicate special path that I showed you guys, holding control, dragging, and then letting go of control, this will only work along a linear path doing this kind of technique. So you can't do this along a curve. So unfortunately, in this case, we won't be able to use that technique to go through and duplicate all these parts. So I'm going to have to just do it the old-fashioned way. So another hotkey I do is Control-Shift-S for solo. Control-Shift-D is the duplicate hotkey. Oh, looks like I got another one in there. All right, so we're going to have to, let's see, maybe this one I'll go to the back now. This part's kind of tedious, trying to just make sure everything's like perfectly spaced. We're getting there. Also, though, on that topic, I guess something I will say about that is when you're doing stylized kind of work and you don't want stuff to be too CG and too perfect, sometimes like these little manual sort of adjustments, just they show out. I think at least it gives the character and the piece a little bit more, I think, life. I don't know, it's just an observation, but like if you try and do too much symmetry and too much perfection, you know, I think it ends up taking away from some of the work that I've seen out there that has a lot of just hand sort of done stuff. Oh, this needs to go down. Oh, whoa, what's going on here? Let's delete that one. This one. Split hidden. Looks like I might have accidentally left a couple of these guys masked. What's up, Dougie? So in this one, that's a great point, man. Always coming in with the zingers. The insert brushes, this stream that I'm doing today is actually a ZBrushCore. So this one we can't make any custom curve brushes or anything. So if you go to the stroke palette, you'll see we have basically just Lazy Mouse, Sculptors Pro, and modifiers. So no curve settings, no insert brush creation. Core does have IMM brushes. So you click the brush palette, you have IMM primitives, you've got the model kit, and the body parts. But no curves for me today. I would love to be doing that with a curve right now. All right, I'm almost done though. Like I just want to get these guys in place, and then let's duplicate, go all the way up here. This is like kind of going back to basics, doing things the old-fashioned way. All right, now once those are like lined up well enough, what I want to do, Ashish, you're asking any other way to join meshes in single mesh into a single mesh in ZBrushCore. Yes, so you can do that. Like these duplicates here, eventually what I'm going to do is merge them all into one. I will talk about that here in a second if that's what you mean. Like that's what I did here for the, if you go to the character, like just the sketch out of the body. Let me just pull up his, like this is just like the body form. Like each one of these pieces is individual. The muscle groups, all these parts I've just kind of gone through and blocked in as primary pieces. But if I just go to subtool, any subtool icon that has the visibility icon on, if we go to merge and do merge visible, then you get a combined subtool with all these parts. And then what I did for this part that I'm on right now is just Dynamesh this, and it's going to weld all these parts together. So now all those pieces that were once separate, oops, Sculptors Pro, I don't know when I turned you on, then I can hold shift and I can go across and I can basically sculpt across these surfaces now. Other than Dynamesh. In ZBrushCore, no. Other than Dynamesh, this is your only method to be able to merge things together. There's no live booleans in this version. Sculptors Pro will not weld two shells together. They have to be welded beforehand. So Dynamesh is your best bet in this version. Okay, so going back to my little boot pieces here. Now, the problem, or what I don't like about these is that they're just hard lines. And I want these to follow the contour of that boot heel so it will all weld up together a lot more evenly and look more natural. So if you go in, as we've been positioning and rotating these, weld vertices, if you go into geometry, modify topology, in the full version, we have weld points, but in ZBrushCore, there is no welding points. So this would be this is what you'll see here is what's normally there for welding and connecting parts. Yeah, so there truly is no other way to weld two objects together in ZBrushCore outside of Dynamesh. It has to be Dynamesh. So what I was saying about these parts is essentially what you get is the pieces lined up. The gizmo has been aligned to the pieces. Jackal's Gecko, you're saying in Core, do you have ZRemesher? Nope. So if you go to Geometry, Modify Topo, this is what you got. You got Dynamesh, Clay Polish, Modify Topology Essentials, and that's it. So we can assign subdivisions to surfaces that are already meshed or have good surfaces. So if you go to Lightbox, like there's some default projects in here. But yeah, and the brush Z modeler is also not available in Core. So if you watch any of my full regular streams, I'm a huge fan of the Z modeler brush. So for me, doing this stuff in Core is, I think that's why I'm saying going back to basics, because it's mostly sculptural and using Dynamesh for pretty much everything. That's what I'm using for this project. And these Dynamesh cubes here, I want these to have wrap around the curvature of this little boot heel. So with the gizmo aligned to the piece, if I go into the customize menu, there's the bend arc deformer. So we do have some deformers in Core. The bend arc, I got to turn symmetry off for this. Let's go turn that on. So that frames to the direction of the gizmo. If you don't know what that means, if I alt click and drag and redirect it over here, and I go turn bend arc on, you see that the frame creates a box around the direction X, Y, and Z axis of the gizmo. So if I undo that, go here, I want these controllers to follow the path along here, mainly because this little green angle will allow me to redirect it in that same direction. So if I go in here and I just go in and do just a little bend curvature, I can click accept. Now I can go to this one, do bend arc. Oh, I got to turn symmetry off for all these. That might be one. I'm going to go into preferences, config, enable customize, just so I can see if my symmetry is on. I'm going to put that up here in the custom UI. And then let's go bend arc. Do that little bend there. Click accept. Dougie, you're saying watching you use ZBrushCore is confusing. Us full version users. Yeah, I can imagine. I tried at the beginning of the streams, I've been trying to make sure everybody knows this is a ZBrushCore stream, because most of the time I'm doing full version of ZBrush. But since the lockdown, myself, Dice K, who is one of our developers in Japan, he's also doing a lot of live streams right now for Core. Logan, you're asking, is there a roadmap somewhere for possible future features in Core? I couldn't say at this time. There is not an official roadmap available to the public. But if you have feature suggestions, you can always submit those to us here or in support. As I am on the development team, I can put in a good word at the very least. Ashish, you were saying insert mesh in geometry menu. What exactly does it do? Oh, that's a good question. So the insert mesh, when you go into this one, this allows you to add one mesh into the currently selected mesh. So if you go into like this piece here, if I do insert mesh and I say add the star, what this is going to do is on this subtool, it creates it adds it to the same subtool. So you see there now one object. If you do subtool insert, if I go here and do insert and add a star, it adds it in the subtool list, but it adds it as a separate piece. So the insert mesh actually adds it into the subtool itself. Oops, delete. All right, so this guy, let's see. I think this is going to have a little bit of bend arc. Yep. And I think I'm going to do one more right here. I think that'll look better. This one might not. Like if this was a lot more curvature, you could go bend arc and we could go turn the angle this way if you wanted. Kind of play around with it there. Ashish, but insert mesh won't join the subtools. It depends on the position of where that subtool was already. So if you go, like you'll see here, if I look at the floor grid for this piece, you see how this piece is over here in space. That piece I just inserted, this poly mesh star. If you look at this in its own tool, that's at the world center. So if I go to this piece here and I do geometry, insert mesh, and I grab that star, it merges it into the same subtool, but it puts it exactly where it was before. So really the only benefit to that is like if you have a piece that you wanted to skip, adding it into the scene and putting it in the same place, you could essentially use the geometry insert mesh menu. Otherwise, like let's just say I clone, I'll clone this piece off, make a new one here, but this one I'll like scale it and move it like here into place. So this one's here, this one's here. If I go to this one, I do insert mesh. Let's go grab that piece. You'll see that that puts it right here. And if it was touching, it's now combined. Hopefully that makes sense. Oh yeah, Electrocrat. Looks like somebody got your question, Logan. Thank you very much for that. Comics Legend, what was the reason for creating the core version, seeing as it's missing many of the full features? The reason for core was to have a more introductory version of ZBrush that was less expensive and would allow somebody who's not necessarily working in production or needs all of the main features to give them something to work on and use. So that was why we created core. And now, of course, we have the subscription version as well, so people can try it out. But core came out first, and we were offering just a more affordable version that would allow you to still sculpt and work in ZBrush. Ashish, you were asking, combined means joined in on single piece. Yes, it does, without Dynamesh. It doesn't actually go in and Dynamesh it for you. It just adds it to the selected subtool and makes it a part of that subtool. So it doesn't do any welding. You would have to go in to Dynamesh if they were touching, and you'd have to click Dynamesh or activate Dynamesh to make that thing weld or touch. See, now this one, because I got a little jumbled up with some of these subtools, this is something to mention with the gizmo, is if you lost your gizmo position, subtools, in this case, we don't have, I can't undo, so I'm trying to undo. So I need this thing to be at the center. It actually doesn't need to be at the center of the object. If I click Bend Arc, let's turn symmetry off for all these darn subtools. It's just following the direction of these X, Y, and Z controllers. So I can't, let's do delete. I need this thing to be reassigned in this direction. So the best way to do this, if I click reset, it resets it to world. I can't currently reset it to the previous setup that it had, but I can try to manually do it. So to manually do it, if you just hold Alt and drag, you can realign the gizmo. So you can snap it to vertex points and almost get this thing to align at least in the proper direction along this thing as if it was framing this box. And then Alt click to center it, and you should get about the same thing. Then we can go do a bend arc. And then I can go in and do a little bit of flexing and click accept. It looks like I got a duplicate here. Let's get rid of that one. All right, I'm just going to turn off symmetry for all these pieces. There we go. Feels so much better doing that. All right, so let's go do a bend arc. Go accept. So you see with these deformers, you can't just do it and leave it. You have, once you activate it, you got to go in. You do your little adjustment there. I'm doing it in the reverse in this one. I can still, little trick is you can click the W key to toggle back and forth between the deformer in its editing stage and the gizmo. So you can still move it around and then click W and go back and do more adjustments. But when you're done, you got to click the gear and you have to click accept to apply it. If you click reset or delete, say I click delete, it goes back to default. If I reset it, it goes back to default. So we go back here and let's click accept. Logan, you're saying if you subscribe to ZBrush full monthly, will you ever fully own a single license, or is it just in perpetual? So just in perpetual. So subscription is literally just month to month. So if you want to own ZBrush, you can buy the perpetual version, which is, as of right now, it has been since ZBrush since ZBrush went to market, it has been free upgrades. So buying perpetual is in your best interest at this point. If you're getting into ZBrush more and you're doing it a lot more, paying month to month, I guess it's up to you guys. I mean, for me, this is one thing that I had to own even before I worked for Pixologic because I used it so much. But it really depends on how much you use it. So you have the options. All right, so I got those things in there. Now, I might want to go through and do like some extra editing to these parts. Yeah, Comic Legend knows what's up. So these like groups of parts here, I'm going to just go to the top one. And if you just select this top one and I'm going to do merge down. So I'm going to merge them all together. So I'm going to click merge down, click always okay. I'm going to keep clicking merge down until I get all these parts together. And that is 1, 2. merge down. All right, there we go. Now what I'm going to do is I might want to just like adjust those pieces and bring them down past the sole there. So go in and do maybe control drag to just do a little mask, inverse. Now, because we're using Dynamesh for this stuff and all these shapes are looking good, we definitely want to use project on, and the resolution, let's see what this does. I'm going to make sure I want to keep this high enough to keep those nice clean edges, which that works great. All right, so now what I can do is let's just go in. You could try and do, let's see if we can do a little, maybe a little trick here. Polygroups. Nope, we won't be able to do group as Dynamesh sub. Let's see. This is actually, let me see if I can give this a little shot. So I'm going to do a duplicate version of this. I'm going to reset Gizmo here. Bring this down, maybe shrink it in. Just curious if this will give me some extra little detail here. So if I set this one to sub, go to this top one, let's do a merge down. And what that does is if I control drag and redynamesh, well, let's go through this process so you can see this real quick. You can get like an extra little bit of details that subtract basically. But so I need to go back here and do this. If I were to go in, let's just say we want to like make some extra little like details on this. Might have to do this with just a quick example with one of these parts. I won't be able to do this very easily with all these parts since they're not going to be scalable, but let's just grab one of these guys. And let's do a duplication, and I'll just grab, with selection lasso, let's grab one piece, and I'll do delete hidden. So you get the top pieces here, and then we get this piece below them. I'm going to take down, and let's just shrink it, maybe bring this in. We can maybe like, yeah, let's have that travel all the way through. All right, so just as a quick example, this is something that you can do for any of you core users that are watching this or will watch this. There is an ability to do a Boolean subtract, a Dynamesh Boolean. So to do that with core, what you have to do is this object, the object that we're using to merge is in Dynamesh mode. This piece below happens to also be in Dynamesh mode. Basically, if we set this object to the subtraction subtool icon, which is normally in the full version is using for live booleans as well. If you set it to subtract, we go to this top piece and we do a merge down. What it does is that piece that had subtract gets a white polygroup, which is a subtractive color in ZBrush. So then if I am in Dynamesh mode and I control drag, it's going to take a piece and do a Boolean subtraction from this part. So now I get a little extra detail that kind of comes out of that shape. So you could do stuff like this to, you know, just enhance some of your parts and pieces. If I was smart, I would have made a duplication of each of these pieces beforehand and just kind of scaled them up manually to kind of go through and do a little subtraction. But something that you have available to you to kind of go through and do those extra little kind of details. Now, for the rest of it, like I just wanted to get the outline of the boot lace pieces and the sort of leather part framing coming up. So let's just do a little mask extract just for reference so I can show you guys this kind of a shape here. Just something that's got some lace holes. This will be, we could do another little Boolean subtraction for this to kind of get stuff in position. Let's do that. So it's going to go about here. Actually, let's go all the way down. Not going to save. We're going to go into mask lasso. I'm sorry, mask pen. I'm just going to kind of go through and just paint out the shape. I appreciate all you full ZBrush users still checking out the stream. I love having you guys here. It's very helpful. Not being sarcastic, it's just nice to have the usual crowd. Hopefully you guys aren't bored out of your minds watching the core stuff, but Joe freaking Mena, what's up, buddy? How you doing, man? So good to hear from you. I hope you're doing well. All right, so for this little extra detail, like I want to get just a decent little like kind of boot extract. You just use this so you don't feel alone while you're sculpting. That's awesome. That's what it's here for. Joe Mena said he sucks at this. If you guys don't know Joe Mena, just Google his name. Just Google Joe Mena and put ZBrush after it, and you'll see if he actually sucks at it or not. So this is one like thing that I kind of play around with is like if you want to create some lace holes for something like this, you could do it quick and easy if you just kind of go in manually. Now we have a pretty low res boot that doesn't give us a very good mask. So if I go in and do Control Alt to kind of go just unmask these little dots here, most likely if I go to Subtool, Extract, you see it fills in that shape because it's too low. Joe Mena said stop. Dude, yeah, hope you're doing well in this lockdown. I'm sure work is just as busy as ever. Okay, Logan, that's really great to hear. I'm glad to hear that you guys are enjoying these core streams. Dice K and myself are currently the only ones doing them, and we're all trying to pick up the extra slack and do more stuff while we're in this lockdown mode. So this is definitely a long time coming. What kind of sculpting is this called? Yeah, this I don't know. This would be I would just call this 3D modeling at this point. I'm not doing as much. I did some sculpting in the last stream, just kind of going in and sculpting out the character. So let's take a look. I mean, just fleshing out the character, doing the sculpting here for the face. Right now, what I'm trying to do is just block out the accessories, so then I can go in and do more of the sculpting on the surfaces and things like that. So I got to get this boot shape completed out before I can really do the lion's share of the sculpting. But the mask here, what I want to do is I'm going to increase the resolution of this piece because we're using Dynamesh right now. Dynamesh is going to make the quality, if I increase that, is going to make the quality of this mask a lot better. So now what I'm going to do is go in here. Thanks, Joe. All I'm trying to do at this point is kind of get I'm using kind of Fortnite style as an example. I like the Fortnite. I think I'm going with Fortnite because I like the level of detail. It's enough. Some stylized forms are so simplified that you lose a little bit more of the modeling aspect, which I want to kind of keep in this design. So like I'm going in to do a better mask here. I went to a higher Dynamesh resolution. Why do I choose the Matte Cat Pearl? That's a good question. I don't know. I think what I like about Matte Cat Pearl is that it highlights edges. So if you go into the material palette, actually in this case we don't, it's just bad habits. The full version of ZBrush, you'll see the material settings. The Matte Cat Pearl, just take my word for it, in the full version, it has cavity detection. So what it does is it highlights those edges really, really nice. So I can see all my edges really clearly. If you go to say Matte Cap Gray, it has a little bit more shadow as well. So it softens up a lot of the surfaces. Other cavity detection materials will be Matte Cap Red Wax. The Poly Skin, this one really does that quite a lot. You'll see I keep a couple of these custom shaders here in my little corner down here, which is just going to Preferences, Config, Enable Customize. And once that's on, I can go into the material, and any material I've selected will be here, and I can Control Alt click and I can drag it and I can dock it over here. But since it's fall, let's say we get rid of Skin Shade, Control Alt click, drag it to the document to get rid of it, and then we can go Control Alt click, let's grab Green Metallic, and then let's turn Customize off. So I like to use it just because I swap back and forth depending on the kind of modeling and or sculpting that I'm doing. If I'm modeling, I just want to see the edges clearly. If I'm sculpting, it's not so good to have this kind of thing on because it highlights details a little bit more then it makes you think that they're there more clearly than they actually might need to be refined. So something to consider when you're using different shaders is the how clear those surfaces are, actually how natural they are, and how much is getting faked by, say, a material or accentuated by a material. So, okay, on this point, as I was kind of delaying here, I just got a nice little mask in, and what we could do is you could hold Control and Alt, and you can go in and just unpaint this mask and clear these holes out. So this is all going to be based on your draw size. But if you keep going, you could accidentally do different sizes. So one thing you could do is we could hold Control, turn on Drag Rect, and grab an alpha, and then do Control Alt, and we could do something like this, or we could drag and stamp these things. That's another one, but in my opinion, like, that's still kind of difficult to make a perfect circle. There's really no, the simplest way is if you were to go through and do that Dynamesh Boolean technique. Get rid of these preferences here. And we could go do, let's just do a quick subtool extract. 0.007, let's go just a little bit thinner. I don't want it to bleed past that boot border. So maybe 0.005. Okay, that one looks pretty good. We'll click accept. All right, now you get this piece. Now, this is one option you have. If you take this thing, we go geometry, Dynamesh it high enough, and then let's just solo this piece out by itself quickly. If we go insert a cylinder, I'm just going to show you this more topically because I don't think that this is a superior way to do stuff like this in Core. I think this is going to take you more time. But essentially, if you do a Boolean technique, you could go in and basically keep one cylinder that is the same size. And then we could duplicate it, move it, roughly into place, duplicate, as long as those things are traveling through that surface. And make your duplications, right? Now, this is still not perfect because you don't necessarily know the distance. The distance is just you're eyeballing it at this point. All right, but if you take these things and we just go merge them together, and we'll make those a Dynamesh. Let's make them a little bit higher. We'll set those to subtract. I'm going to take this piece, merge down, and they get that white polygroup, and then Control Drag to re-Dynamesh, and you'll get a little subtraction to get those boot holes going. So a lot of extra steps. In my opinion, I like I mentioned, I don't think it's necessary to do that. For something like this, I'm just going to bite the bullet and just do it by hand. It's not the end of the world to go in and just start going back to your old fine art skills if you got them. Rui, you're saying Core doesn't have drag dot. So Core, you have drag dot here in the stroke palette. Yeah, drag dot. Yeah, that's a good point. You could use drag dot with a little control. That would be a good way to do it. Didn't even cross my mind. It's a good point. And this way, if you do it with drag dot, you'll get the same size. Rui coming in with the hot tips. I like it. So for this to work, if you wanted to do this, so if you aren't familiar with what drag dot does, it basically, in this case, we're assigning it to a mask. So when I hold Control with drag dot in a little circular alpha, as I hold Control, it's going as a control and drag. As soon as I let go of my cursor, it's locking that thing in space. But if you want to subtract it, we could also go in, if you decrease that focal shift, you're going to get, I need to hold Control, set focal shift to 0. Then I'll get a solid little dot. So the focal shift basically affects the alpha and or the draw stroke, and basically it's going to give you, if you look at the draw size, you have those two rings. So the focal shift is essentially the fall off between that center circle and the outer circle. If there's none, the shape that you see is going to be perfectly crisp. So it's easier to see this with, say we do it with a, like one of these little pinwheel things. If you have your focal shift at 0, hold Control, you see it starts to fade out. So it's darker and then it fades out in that mask. If you hold Control, set that to -100. -100 basically means, let's do this so you can see it. You'll see that when it's at -100, that outer circle is basically sitting on the outer edge. But if you go to the +100, it shrinks down smaller and smaller. So more fall off, less fall off, none. So then with a little circle alpha, now I can go in and hold Control and Alt and then click and drag. And now I can get a little subtraction with that circle. And it will be the same size. Rui, I'm actually pronouncing it correctly. That's amazing. All right, dude. I'm happy to do it. I mean, my name being Solomon is not always the easiest, depending on where you're from. Solomon is tough for some people. I've been getting Salamander, Salomon. So if I'm saying anything, I'm saying I know I feel your pain. Yeah, you would think so because it is a biblical name. Some people just don't remember it as that. I don't know. The only guy I've ever met in person with the name Solomon was African, which I thought was really interesting. Solomon is actually, I think, a more, at least in Jewish communities, is more of a common last name, I believe. Anyways, moving on from that topic, the mask, that works out really great with the drag rag to at least get evenly spaced dots. And now what I would do is go in and let's just do a extract 0.05. Let's go through. So you'll see like the scale of those little circles in there. If we extract right here, you see that they shrink a little bit. This will depend on the resolution. But if we inverse this, or actually if we leave the current selection and we control click, it's going to soften up that blur, which basically what this means is it blurs towards itself, away from those unmasked borders. So it's basically blurring away from that circle. Now if I control alt click to sharpen, it sharpens it and it basically makes those circles bigger. So control click to blur, control alt click to sharpen, and you're making those the mask and that border. The thing that you're running into potentially is this bleeding across the distance between those circles. So you got to be careful with that. Otherwise, if you inverse this and then control click and control click, you shrink it too far on that side. So you got to be careful with the masking and blurring. But you can use that to tidy up those circles a little bit, or I'll just leave them. Let's click accept, and now we get a good little result. And then let's go clear that mask. This piece, I'm going to Dynamesh high res enough, and then I'm going to do the only procedural smoothing that we're going to have in this is one I like to use all the time in all my other streams. The Smooth All Gizmo Deformer is amazing in the full version of ZBrush, but in deformation we also have polish, which polish is going to go through and just smooth out or polish the entire surface, which will kind of blend those edges together, and now you'll get a pretty nice little result. Now for laces, laces are really the only thing that you can do with lace work is Z-spheres. I think Z-spheres are the best method that we would have to go through and do that. I would probably, do I want to do laces? I think I want to just, because it's stylized, here's the thing, is stylized, I don't want to have too many lace holes either. I'm just realizing that. So I think what I'll do here is like, let's go in. I'm going to turn this mask off for the control mask key. Oops, control, set this back to freehand. I'm going to paint in every other one. Maybe we'll just leave two there at the top. Not so bad. But that is just a quick little design choice I wanted to change before I got too far ahead of myself here. And let me just go in and let's fill in this little border as well. All right, so I just shrunk it down a little bit, filling in that border. Let's do extracts, accept, and now we get this. Now, what I'm going to do next, before I even, actually, let's go in and just do a quick, I do want to Dynamesh it, pretty high res. Now, a little trick to do, this might not be the most perfect method to do eyelets, but I do want to get maybe some little eyelets here for the border here inside to have like a little metallic eyelet. So another thing that we would have in the full version of ZBrush, we have insert brushes with a lot of clothing parts. Eyelets is one of them. But to do just a quick little border for these lace holes, what I'll do is let's just grab Control-Shift-Click on this polygroup. I'll turn double-sided on. And I'm going to do another hotkey I use a lot is auto groups, which I do Control-Shift-P. So Control-Shift-P, or just clicking auto groups, is going to give me unique polygroups to each one of these major shells. So I really only want, let's undo that. I want to get rid of this one. And now we get these guys together. So in this case, actually, you don't even really need to, we just wanted to be able to separate out that border, that edge loop border. So now that I have these, I'm going to Control-A, which masks all. And then I'm going to do Control-Click, Control-Alt-Click to sharpen. Actually, let's leave that as it was and see how this works out. So I'm just masking off the interior extrusions from the extracted piece as part of the eyelet. So let's do Subtool, Extract. Oh, hey, that's a little too much. Let's go 0.001. That's pretty good. And it is going to capture from that border there. Let's see. Let me try this. I'm going to do a little, I'm going to duplicate this so it'll keep this version. If you go back to the original part, the original one should have history, which I can undo back to before I extract. Okay, so let's try this. It's just something to compare. The extraction from a Dynamesh versus the extraction on the edge loop here on the inside. So if you go in, this is just stuff I play around with, like if I want to try and get a better result. These are things you could try. I'm going to turn double side on. I'm going to just isolate out these green ones. So a little trick is if you want to grab, see if you try and click on this polygroup, it's really hard to isolate it. And that's because polygroups are selected by vertex point, not by edge. So you have to click on a vertex point. What happens when you click on a polygroup here that sits on the same vertex point, we have blue and green showing the same vertex. When I Control-Shift-Click on it, it's going to grab both of those, which actually is only going to basically get rid of the inside of that part of the boot. So now what I got to do is I want to Control-Shift-Click on blue to get rid of that. And then I'm going to do my little auto groups. And then I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on this to get rid of it. Now I can mask off these pieces. And let's just leave these visible. You'll see when I Control-Shift-Click, what happens when you mask it when it's hidden and come back is you get a little bit of bleed that happens over that border. So if I go Subtool, Extract here, it's going to bleed and give me that little ring, which that's actually not so bad. That looks pretty good. But what I like about this technique is what it does do is it's giving you these, it's extracting from the extractions, it take the existing topology and extract from that. And the only thing that it adds is the edge loop to give it the thickness. So if you look at this, let's just say we go in and do this piece. I'm just going to delete that one real quick. Let's go back to this one. Let's grab this, mask these off. If I do extract, accept, take a look at the topology here. So you'll see you get this kind of crazy little thickness edge loop, but the topology is based on that Dynamesh surface, which is a little bit, it's a little bit more messy in terms of like the cleanliness of that surface, which means we'd probably have to clean it up a little bit more. But if you go back to this version, now let's just say I don't want any of that bleed happening in there. If I undo and I mask this off while only showing these parts and I do extract, you're going to see you get no bleed and it's just one clean little cap. So then what I'll probably do is let's just go 0.0009. I want to go something pretty small. Oh, so that thickness is really just going to keep going based on that border. So we could call this, let's say that that's like good. Click accept. And then let's turn on, bring this thing back. Now for these guys, what I'll probably do is, let's go do a little with Gizmo. we don't have the ability to control click to bring these guys out. But what I'll probably do now is they're nice and clean flat surfaces. If we take these guys and we just do a little, say we dynamesh this evenly, high res, and then we go do just a little deformation, maybe inflate balloon. Whoa, that's too much. Geometry, dynamesh this, do a little deformation, do a little polish. Now you'll get like a more flat capped result. You know, something to try out. Mexicris, you're saying you feel like you're attaining more info and run through with your presentation than the other streams. Oh, you're welcome, man. Thank you so much for that compliment. That makes me very happy. This one, I'm definitely talking a lot more about the fundamentals, whereas other streams I might just be going through stuff that I don't necessarily spend time talking about. I just want to make it. So like this piece here, I'm just going to go in and I'll just polish this out, and now we get a little eyelet on the inside. And that looks pretty good. I think that'll be great. Now, I'm already going over my time here. I'm supposed to go to 4. I got to get back to work. But I would say I'll just spend maybe 15 more minutes on, this is something that I like to do with laces that takes, I think a lot of people have a hard time trying to get lace work to flow over correctly. This is pretty challenging to do if you don't follow like a very clean sort of procedure. So for me, it's using Z-spheres. So insert, oh no, did I get rid of all my Z-spheres? I might have accidentally removed and or deleted them. Wait, no, I do have that Z-sphere armature. Here we go. Yep, let's go back to this guy. So I'm going to get rid of all these guys, just deleting. I think the top one was my starter. All right, so we got a Z-sphere. That's all we need. Go back to the boot. All right, now I'm going to insert that Z-sphere into the scene. Let's turn on transparency. Where the heck is it? It's way up here. So I'm going to shrink this baby down. And this is how I like to, it's an old school way. If you guys ever bought, if you're old school ZBrush users and you bought Paul Gabry's book, I think it was ZBrush Tips and Tricks back in the day. He had a pretty awesome demo in there for his hockey skates. He had a little project he did making hockey skates to do laces. And I think still to this day, and if you're using ZBrush to do this, it's probably your best method to get a clean result. So what you do is, this is the way that I recommend doing it, is start at the base here. You put the sphere right here in the middle, and we're going to start building from here. So we're going to go up and out all the way through. So it's going to be one complete chain. Now you just set the Z-sphere to be about the same size, the thickness of the lace you want it to be. And with Z-spheres, when you draw out from the sphere, as you click and drag, when you're dragging, you're scaling it up. And it's kind of hard. I want these to all be the exact same size. So when I press A, or actually, let's do 3 of them. You have to have 3 Z-spheres to get a clean strip of geometry. But I want them to all be the same thickness. So to make them the same thickness when you're drawing, this is a little tip if you're not familiar with Z-spheres, is when you start drawing, hold Control and then hit Shift, and it locks it to the size of the Z-sphere you're drawing from. And then a little tip too is Control Shift. If you keep dragging, it actually does a little extrusion in the direction you're pulling, and that makes it the same size. So what I do is I'll start by drawing here, draw, Control Shift, pull out a little bit, and then switch to move. I'm going to start by just getting this piece to go over top. So it's going up, over, and then shooting underneath and going through. So then what I do is, like when you preview it, you're getting a step. So eventually what I do between 3 steps here is I drop a sphere in the middle, drop one in the middle, go move this up a little bit so you get a little bit more curvature. Now when we remesh this, we will have an option to kind of smooth it out overall. But from here, now what I do is go down, I'm going to hold Control Shift and drag. This will be that piece that's kind of going down underneath and going through. So then here I'm going to go Control Shift drag, bring this out and up. Still not far enough. There we go. Now this one's going to go underneath, over top, and then down underneath and over. So I'm going to get this just in place. Then what I do is drop one in the middle to cut that in half. Let's go drag this thing up a little bit. So you're getting the right leverage. And then just drop one, cutting those in half. And you'll start to be able to like curve this thing out. Now you get this little dotted line effect that does happen. That usually just means that one sphere is converging into another's sort of space, another zone. So you see it looks like it's this one. So if I just bring that up and out, this will offset itself and fix itself. Mexicris, you were asking what's your stream schedule and other platforms to stream. Here, let me show you that really quick. Sorry, I'm saying a lot today. I'm going to copy my previous streams. Yeah, you're welcome, Brian. I'll complete this here in a second so you can kind of see where I'm heading. I'm going to paste this as well. This is my ZBrush live stream, this is my current stream. I'm streaming every Thursday, every week. Every other week I'm doing a different version. So this week I'm on Core. Next Thursday I am on ZBrush, which is that second link, the Super Mario world mashed up with Blade Runner. So I'm kind of going through different builds. I want to do a whole scene for that one. So it's every week on Thursdays. On next week though, I start at 11. This week I'm on at 2 Pacific time. So it's 11 and 2 o'clock. So yeah, for this portion here, what I'm doing is I'm just continuing this build process. Control-Shift-Click. Let's grow this thing down. Control-Shift-Click to bring this up. You want to keep this so it doesn't get too complicated. This is why I'm telling you exactly how many spheres I normally do. Because for me, I do this with my students. I teach product design and footwear and these kinds of things in ZBrush. And still, Z-spheres are the best way to do this, just hands down, in terms of just getting it done. And there's other tricks that you can always try, for sure, that come into the mix, and I'll try other things sometimes. But in this case, like, I just find that this is the most straightforward way, where I know that it's going to work. Whereas sometimes in different cases, you never know. Some things are just, it depends on the project or the pieces, and you guys know how that goes. So then going to this view, I just want to let's complete a portion of this strand. So we'll go do this last little bit here. This is just an easier way also, I find, to get the overlap, to see the overlapping portion of the laces of how they go. So this one's going to go underneath. That means that this should probably go down on the base, and then this one should probably go over top of that one. So it looks a little stair-steppy at this point, which is okay. The cleanup process will help. So then cutting this one in half, giving it just a little bit more curvature. Also, the benefit that which you get out of this is when you press A, basically each connecting chain gets a polygroup. So you see when I get A, between here and here, it gets its own polygroup. And it shows that with the Z-spheres when you turn polyframe on. So if it's not clear, a lot of times you'll see me changing or turning this on. I'm just pressing Shift F to turn on the polyframe. And I always I'm 90% of the time I feel like I'm working with polyframe on just to see polygroups. That's really the only reason. Sometimes it's for topology, but mostly polygroups. Okay, so let me frame this stuff. And let's do, what's going on with the zoom here? We got that one going. And let's just, I'll leave this thing, I'll leave it as is since I got to cut this thing off. It's already 4:15. Thanks, Mexicris. Thank you for commentary, and I'll see you at the next stream then for sure. So then to clean this part up, what you'll notice with the adaptive skin currently is I previously went through and I showed at the beginning of the stream doing an armature with the Z-sphere. So it's still set up in the same way. By default, Dynamesh will be set to 256. Density will be at 2. And preview, when I click preview, you basically get a Dynamesh result, which this isn't good for laces because you're going to get the welding happening with Dynamesh, and it's going to be impossible to disconnect these or work them in a different way. So this works in full version of ZBrush. You have more power and creativity in the full version of ZBrush because you could Z-remesh these things later. But in Core, we have absolutely an easy result for this, which is just turning Dynamesh off. And when Dynamesh is off, it defaults to the old remeshing algorithm, which is basically just creating these nice clean edge loops. And this is actually what I want. So these clean edge loops, once you get this stuff in place, first thing I usually do is let's make adaptive skin. So we'll get these parts, and let's go back here. And I'm just gonna, I'll leave the Z-sphere in edit preview, but I'm gonna go insert that new skin. We'll call this like lace test. And what I do for this is you want to get rid of these hard stepping lines. So first thing you could do is just do a little polish. So polish is going to start to round those things out a lot. All right. Now you'll start to get an easier result as you keep going, which polish actually does a great job of just locking all this stuff in. If I wanted to go in and do just the borders here where it connects to, or it's going into the eyelets, this is where those poly groups are pretty handy. So if we go in, say we don't do any, actually we'll do just like a little bit of polishing there and solo that out. You'll see what happens with polish if I keep running it. You see how some parts are kind of converging and ballooning out in different ways? This just has to do with how those borders are connecting. So if you press Control W and you polish, you see, actually in this case, this won't make a difference. That's a different polishing feature. But I do a little bit of polish, I get this thing going, and then now maybe I want to shrink just the sides so that they look like they're kind of getting thin and shooting through those lace holes. So this is where those poly groups are super handy. So select, reverse, I'll turn double side on, and then click and hide these little borders here. Now I can mask this off. So these are just sitting here at that edge. I'll do it just for these ones. Actually, we can go ahead and do it for the other ones here in a second. Joe, thank you, buddy. Are you taking off? I assume that's a goodbye. So I would go grab this one, also mask that off, and then control click to blur, and maybe inverse to blur. So I'm just isolating out those little corners. And if I just do a little inflate, I can kind of start to scale that. Now, the better that blur is, the better this is going to work in terms of an even sort of effect. Oh, it's almost over. I'm doing a Paul Gabriel right now. I'm tangenting. I'm getting caught up in the nitty gritty. Like 5 minutes, and I do have to go to work. So yeah, hopefully that gives you some ideas. You can kind of scale that stuff down, and then what I like to do from here on out is, if you don't like these cylindrical soft laces, say you want them to be flat on the top, the only thing that we can do in core to really speed this up, yeah, future goodbyes for when it's over, exactly, is to just sculpt it, to H polish it probably. So this is where what I would do for these laces is Control Shift click and grab these top groups, make those a group. I'm going to make, sometimes I'll keep those little edge poly groups there on the transition, but then I'll do the long stems here. So this, make that a group. This, and this, make that one, and then let's do these guys. So by giving them solid poly groups, what I can do now is I can grab this thing, I can mask it off. And what I'm trying to avoid here is if I don't have that, if I go in with like H polish, if I hit it, I might be hitting other parts of this mesh. So that's a problem. So if I have the poly groups, now I can kind of go in and I can start to, at the low resolution, start just, this is, I'm a little heavy handed with the H polish brush, so I reduced the Z intensity quite a bit. So a bigger draw size should help here. There we go. And now we can start polishing. Now it's pretty low res. You could, of course, like, not, the benefit to this is you get the old algorithm remeshes with these nice clean edge loops. And that's very different. This is going to be closer to what you would get with ZRemesher. If you ZRemesh this, it's going to come out about the same. But this gets you straight out of the gate in core that you can't get with a ZRemesh in core, since we don't have that in ZBrushCore. So what we get here is we could just take this thing, add a couple subdivisions, and now you could basically go to a higher level if you want to do a little masking. And at this higher level, we could go in and start dynameshing out, or I'm sorry, H polishing out this portion. And then mask this one off and just kind of rinse and repeat. So H-polish kind of helps to flatten out those laces. This would be your best bet in core. Now, sometimes you'll see, as I'm trying to go through here, I can't sculpt on a part of the surface that's being protected by another subtool. So what I need to do, this is where those polygrips really come into play, is I can isolate out this piece, and let's just do that sculpting here. And then just rinse and repeat. So you can start flattening out those laces. All right, so I didn't complete it. I'm being lazy today, but this is going to be essentially I'd call this one completed. I'm going to come back on the following Thursday, not next week. I'll be on my ZBrush mashup stream, the full version. But the following week, I'll come back. This will be done. I will do this the same way, and I'll move on to some of the extra accessories because I want to get to just blocking out even some of these other additional components in core, things that we could do to get some more complicated shapes in here with Dynamesh alone. Even though we're only using Dynamesh, there's a lot that we can do to get some pretty cool shapes and some good sort of modeling techniques that we can get done. So I'll probably call it there. Let me check you guys' chat. Okay, Patrick, you were checking out the deformation. That stuff sounds like that was good for you. I'm so glad that that was informative. Dafu, you were saying maybe mask edges and use Gizmo to flatten. That would be an interesting idea. With Gizmo, though, we could, like, you can go in with a flatten on a single object. The problem that you could be right. The problem that I could foresee is when you have flatten, when you have an object with a curvature, when you turn on Gizmo, say we go on and we do flatten. Whoops. Let's just delete higher and lower. Mask this off. Do a flatten here. It's a deformer rectangle. So it's working within a linear space, essentially. So if I go through and I flatten like this, you see this is what we're going to get. Is it's going to do, it can't compensate for the curvature. So if we were to maybe do it like straight across and then maybe bend deform it into the holes, that could be an option. Definitely. And Sinister, you're saying awesome techniques. You're so welcome, man. Thank you for the compliments. I'm glad this is informative for you guys. Comics Legends, thanks for tuning in as always and for your commentary. Nerb, you're very welcome. I'm glad to share some tricks with you. Tune in next week or the following week. I'll be back on this project. If you want to check out my full ZBrush stream, I sent you guys the links. You guys should have that in this chat. If you don't, gosh, I'm just spamming it to you guys today. Let's just do it one more time. Why not? This is where I'm currently at next Thursday at 2 p.m. And yeah, it'd be great to have you guys hit me up on Instagram. You can follow me on my ZBC account here, the link I just sent you. I'd be happy to connect with all you guys on Insta, my personal and my art. And yeah, I think we'll call it a stream. So thank you, all of you for tuning in and staying active in the chats. Brian, you're asking, when do you usually stream? This stream this week, I'm at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Next week, I'm at 11 a.m. And the following week, I'm back on at 2. And I'm just alternating that schedule. So every other week, it's 11 and 2 on Pacific time. If that changes, that will be on ZBrushLive.com. I know somebody mentioned earlier that we don't have the schedule up. So you can actually, you'll see my schedule here in my previous streams. April 2nd, April 16th. Hey, that might be really old. 11/11. I think that's old, but I could be wrong. I don't know when they've updated that information. But anyways, yeah, my pleasure, guys. Sorry, Jupiter, one more thing. Is there a way to attach all the objects to a single object? For example, adding bolts to an object without an IMM brush. Attach the object to a single object. No, not without an insert brush, not in position inside of the model. So somebody else was asking earlier about what geometry. If you go to geometry, modify topo, there's an insert mesh option. So what insert mesh does, let's just say I'll go clone off these little boots. And so these boots, if you take a look at where they're at in insert in 3D space here, they're on the left side of the x-axis. If I click insert mesh and I say go grab this cone, if you look at the cone's here in the center. If I go here and I do insert mesh, and I click cone, it adds it to the selected subtool. It merges it in the subtool. But the position in 3D space is just taking it from one place to another. So the only way to have, if you wanted to, say, add or drag and drop some additional elements into like these boots, you would have to have an insert brush to do that. Otherwise, your best bet is to, like I did with the boot pieces, move it with Gizmo. Like I would insert a, if I wanted, like, I don't know, for whatever reason, if I wanted a little cone cap to go jam into that surface, bring that thing down. Say I want some spikes to kind of shoot out of these boots. It's like an extra defense mechanism maybe. You would have to go in, position this manually. If you want to do quick duplicates, you can hold Control and drag. That'll duplicate within the same subtool. So now I have two. Control, and you'll see when I Control drag, it drags both parts. If I mask this off, then inverse Control drag, it's going to go in and do something like this. So your only option is insert mesh or manually position, and then take these things and merge down, and then merge them into a single subtool. Okay, cool. Looks like the melee attack is like kicking with the boot. That'd be a tough way to die, or a tough way to get a kill with this alone. Maybe put those spikes down. That would actually make a lot more sense. But hey, you know, maybe we could do it out and down. But anyways, guys, all right, take it easy. Everybody be safe, and I will see you all next Thursday. If you're tuning in, I'll be on at 11 a.m. next Thursday. Cheers, everybody.